The room was loud, cameras flashing, reporters whispering, chairs shifting. Another ordinary press moment, or at least that's what everyone thought. Muhammad Ali walked in with his usual calm confidence. No rush, no smile, just presence. The kind of presence that made conversations fade without him saying a single word. People expected humor. They expected charisma. They expected the Ali they always saw on television. But something felt different. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked across the room, not at the crowd, not at the cameras, at one person. A journalist raised his hand. No one noticed him at first. He didn't look important. He didn't look famous. But the question he carried would change the atmosphere of the entire room. The moderator nodded. The microphone was passed. A simple gesture, a normal routine. Then the question was asked. No shouting, no insults, no jokes, just a sentence, calm, direct, almost quiet. And Muhammad Ali didn't respond. Seconds passed. Reporters waited for the punchline. The audience leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in, expecting the legendary comeback that always made headlines. But Ali stayed silent. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the man, then looked down at his hands, and the energy in the room shifted. Whispers began. A cough echoed from the back row. Someone nervously adjusted their tie. It was the first time many had ever seen Muhammad Ali choose silence over words. Why wasn't he answering? Was he offended? Was he angry? Or was he thinking of something deeper than anyone in that hall could understand? The journalist who asked the question started to look unsure. The moderator leaned closer to the microphone, ready to move on. And just when it seemed like the moment would pass unnoticed, Muhammad Ali slowly lifted his head. His eyes were calm, not defensive, not emotional, just certain. The room froze again. Everyone expected a response, a clever line, a sharp joke, a powerful statement. But what they didn't know was that one single question had just unlocked a memory. And the answer he was about to give would leave the entire world thinking differently about him forever. The hall was massive. Bright lights hanging from the ceiling, cameras lined up like soldiers, and rows of journalists filling every seat. It wasn't just another interview venue. This was a place where statements turned into headlines, and headlines turned into history. Outside the building, crowds had already gathered hours earlier, fans holding posters, children sitting on their fathers' shoulders, vendors selling small photographs of a smiling Muhammad Ali, gloves raised, chin high, undefeated in spirit. Inside, however, the mood was different. Here, admiration mixed with expectation. Journalists weren't just here to celebrate him. They were here to challenge him, to question him, to get a reaction powerful enough to echo across newspapers and television screens the next morning. The stage itself was simple: a long wooden table, 2 microphones, a glass of water, and a backdrop filled with logos. Nothing extraordinary, yet the air carried weight, as if the room knew something meaningful was about to unfold. Muhammad Ali sat in the center seat. He didn't speak. He didn't adjust his posture repeatedly like nervous guests often do. He simply sat grounded, composed, almost statuesque. A champion who no longer needed to prove he was a champion. Every movement around him felt louder because of his stillness. The click of a camera shutter, the shuffle of papers, the quiet whisper between 2 reporters debating who would ask the first question. Ali observed everything. Not with suspicion, not with pride, but with awareness. The kind developed over years of standing under bright lights while the world demanded entertainment from him. He had been in rooms like this hundreds of times. He knew the rhythm, he knew the expectations, and he knew how quickly admiration could turn into confrontation with a single poorly chosen sentence. Most people in the audience were smiling, eager, almost excited. For them, Muhammad Ali was not just a boxer. He was a living legend, a symbol of courage, humor, rebellion, and brilliance. They expected charm. They expected wit. They expected that famous confidence that made even critics applaud. But Ali wasn't performing today. He was present but reserved, listening more than looking, thinking more than reacting. The contrast was powerful. In a room full of noise, he became the quiet center. In a place designed for talking, he chose observation. And that silence made people lean closer. Some journalists glanced at each other, unsure whether to begin lightly or dive straight into serious questions. Others scribbled notes, rehearsing their lines internally. They all wanted the same thing, a memorable moment. What they didn't realize was that the moment had already begun. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was turning into something deeper, something heavier. Something that didn't need raised voices to command attention. Engagement beat. If you respect legends who carry power without shouting, take a second to like this video. It helps these real stories reach more people. And subscribe, because the next moments in this story only get more unexpected. Back in the hall, the moderator tapped the microphone lightly. A small sound, but it echoed across the silence like a signal. The first question was about to be asked. Pens were lifted, cameras zoomed in, breaths were held. And Muhammad Ali remained completely still, as if he already knew that among the many voices in that room, one question would rise above all the others and change the direction of the entire conversation. The microphone finally reached the journalist who had raised his hand earlier. He wasn't sitting in the front row. He wasn't dressed in the sharpest suit. In fact, if someone had scanned the room quickly, they might have missed him entirely. But now all eyes shifted in his direction. He cleared his throat once, then again. Not out of nervousness, but as if he wanted to make sure every syllable would land exactly where he intended. Muhammad. He began, voice steady but quiet. After everything you've won, everything you've proven, do you ever regret the things you chose not to fight for? The room didn't react immediately. It was not an insulting question, not aggressive, not loud, but it was personal. The kind of question that doesn't challenge a man's strength, it challenges his memories. Muhammad Ali blinked slowly. For a brief second, it looked like he might smile it off, turn it into humor, deflect it the way he had done hundreds of times before. But he didn't. His fingers resting on the table gently curled inward, not tight, just thoughtful. His gaze drifted away from the journalist and settled somewhere distant, not on a person, not on a camera, but on a place only he could see. Silence spread again, but this time it felt different, heavier, more intimate. The audience expected a clever line about championships, about boxing records, about victories in the ring. But the question wasn't about belts or trophies. It was about choices, and choices for Muhammad Ali carried stories the public rarely saw. Images seemed to pass behind his eyes, late nights in training camps, arguments behind closed doors, moments when pride had to stand against pressure, times when saying no cost him more than saying yes ever could. The cameras zoomed closer. A reporter in the second row lowered his pen, realizing this was no longer routine journalism. This was something deeper, something human. Ali inhaled slowly, the kind of breath a person takes when a memory knocks unexpectedly. His shoulders didn't drop, his posture didn't weaken. But there was a shift, subtle, almost invisible. The shift of a legend becoming a man again, even if just for a moment. The journalist who asked the question didn't interrupt. He simply waited. And that patience made the silence louder. People in the audience began interpreting the quiet in their own ways. Some thought Ali was offended. Others believed he was preparing a powerful comeback. A few sensed that the question had touched a place far removed from fame or sport. What no one understood yet was that the silence itself was the response, at least for now, because regret is not a word champions often admit. And yet, every champion carries moments they revisit privately, long after the applause fades. Ali's eyes moved again, this time scanning the crowd, faces blurred together under the bright lights, supporters, critics, admirers, skeptics, all waiting for a sentence that would define the moment. But inside his mind, the timeline was different. He wasn't seeing the hall. He was seeing crossroads, decisions that shaped not only his career, but his identity. There were fights he accepted. There were fights he refused. There were words he spoke boldly. And there were words he swallowed, knowing the world might never understand why. A small murmur began at the back of the room, quickly fading when others signaled for silence. No one wanted to miss what would come next. Because now it was clear this was not about boxing, not about sports, not even about reputation. This was about legacy. And legacy is heavier than any championship belt. The moderator leaned forward slightly, unsure whether to move on or give Ali more time, but something in Ali's expression said wait. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was contemplation, the rare kind that only appears when a person weighs truth against expectation. The journalist's question lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. Do you ever regret the things you chose not to fight for? In that moment, viewers, whether sitting in that hall or watching years later, began forming their own answers for him. But Muhammad Ali wasn't interested in quick answers. He wasn't interested in satisfying curiosity with easy words. He was searching for something precise, something honest, something that wouldn't just end the silence, but justify it. And just when the tension felt like it might break under its own weight, Muhammad Ali shifted slightly in his chair. Not to speak yet, not to dismiss the question, but to prepare. Because the answer forming in his mind was not going to be loud, not going to be flashy, and certainly not what anyone in that hall expected. Muhammad Ali didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair. The room's chatter had faded almost completely, replaced by the quiet hum of anticipation. Journalists straightened in their seats, pens hovering over notebooks, cameras trained on him, as though trying to capture the weight of his silence itself. He didn't need to hurry. He didn't need to convince anyone of his greatness in this moment. He had already done that, time and time again. What mattered now was something deeper. Ali's eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, not with hostility, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with understanding. Each person in that room felt the gravity of that gaze. Some shifted uncomfortably, feeling exposed. Some whispered quietly to their neighbors, unsure if the silence was intentional or accidental. And the journalist who had asked the question, he sat frozen, realizing that Ali's quiet wasn't indecision, it was precision. Ali's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table, a rhythm almost imperceptible, a subtle sign of thought, a sign that he was not merely listening to the room, he was listening to himself. To the questions, yes, but also to the choices behind them, to the years behind him, the fights he had won, the fights he had refused, and the moments when words could wound more than punches ever could. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a fist. He didn't perform theatrically. He simply waited. And in that waiting, the room leaned in. The power of a legend doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it comes from stillness, from patience, from the calm certainty that no one can rush your truth. A few of the reporters glanced at each other, whispering about what this silence could mean. Some speculated that he was angry, some that he was confused. Neither was true. Ali was neither confused nor provoked. He was composing his answer, letting it take the exact shape it needed to have maximum impact. Not on the journalist, not on the cameras, but on the hearts of everyone who was watching. And then, subtly, the shift began. The journalist who asked the question noticed it first, a small movement in Ali's eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, not enough to call a smile, but enough to signal thoughtfulness. He was not dismissing the question. He was acknowledging it. Everyone else in the room noticed it next. The cameras clicked. The whispers stopped. Even the moderator seemed to sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Ali's calmness became a form of authority, not aggressive, not confrontational, but undeniable. The audience felt it, even before a single word was spoken. The same man who had floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee in the ring now wielded silence like a weapon of thought, and no one in the room, no reporter, no cameraman, no spectator, dared to interrupt him. For minutes he remained like that, quiet, still, observant. Every person in the room knew one thing. When Muhammad Ali spoke, it would not be ordinary. It would not be casual. It would carry meaning. And in that meaning they sensed a lesson, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes slowly, deliberately, leaving a silence louder than any shouting could be. Engagement beat. If you've ever seen power in silence, drop a like right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because the moment he finally speaks will leave you speechless. Ali shifted slightly, and now the journalist realized it was not just preparation. Ali had decided how the room would hear him, not by controlling them aggressively, but by controlling himself. The people in the room noticed subtle signs of change. A few journalists leaning forward, some holding their pens tighter, the moderator tilting slightly in anticipation. Even the camera operators adjusted, sensing this was more than an interview. This was a lesson unfolding in real time. For Ali it was simple. Speak only when necessary, say only what matters, let your presence do the rest. And as the moments stretched, one thought became clear to everyone watching. This is how a true champion carries himself, not just in the ring, but in life: calm, measured, observant, patient, and in that calm, every word that will come will carry more weight than anyone could anticipate. Ali's hands rested now on the table, fingers lightly touching, no tension, no fidgeting. His breathing remained steady, unhurried. His eyes still scanned the room, connecting briefly with journalists, supporters, even skeptics, and each person felt, on a subtle level, the magnitude of his presence. A legend didn't need theatrics. He didn't need anger. He didn't need loud defiance. He only needed silence, and the world was already paying attention. The room held its collective breath. Every spectator, journalist, and camera operator knew what comes next will be worth the wait. And in that pause, in that quiet, Ali reminded everyone why he was, and always would be, more than just a fighter. The silence had grown almost unbearable. Every camera shutter sounded deafening. Every shuffle of paper echoed through the room like a drumbeat. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed louder against Muhammad Ali's quiet presence. The journalist who had asked the question fidgeted subtly, his confidence waning under the weight of Ali's gaze. He had expected hesitation, perhaps a witty comeback, maybe even a light laugh. But what he hadn't expected was this deliberate calm, this patient dominance. The way Ali's silence seemed to pull attention away from everything else in the room. And slowly, the others began to notice. Reporters who had been scribbling notes paused, pens hovering mid-air. Camera operators tilted their cameras, adjusting focus as if trying to capture the invisible energy filling the room. Even those in the back row, people who had come just to witness another press spectacle, leaned forward instinctively, caught in the quiet gravity of the moment. A subtle tension crept into the air. It wasn't fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that prickles at the skin, the kind that tells you something important is unfolding, and you're part of it. Then the journalist's colleague, the one who had been whispering answers to him, stopped talking. He realized, in that instant, that Ali's attention was not superficial. He wasn't watching to perform politeness. He was watching to understand. And with understanding comes accountability. The questioner shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of the weight he carried. It was no longer just a sentence in a press room. It was a reflection of choices, courage, and perhaps even conscience. Some of the reporters tried to break the tension with small coughs, quiet movements, anything to remind themselves they were still just doing a job, but their attempts failed. The room's energy had shifted irreversibly. Ali's eyes, calm but penetrating, scanned the hall again. Every individual felt almost instinctively that he was reading them, not judging them, not confronting them, just noticing, registering, understanding. And as he did, the journalist who had asked the question began to sweat, not out of fear of punishment, but out of recognition that he was facing a man whose life had been defined by courage, not in violence, but in standing firm for what he believed, even when it was unpopular. A few reporters whispered quietly to each other, trying to interpret the moment. Is he angry? Is he disappointed? Or is this something bigger? Meanwhile, Ali's composure remained unshaken. The subtle shift of his shoulders, the measured blink of his eyes, the slow, deliberate inhale, everything spoke louder than any words could. It was authority without aggression, power without force, and the room responded instinctively. At the back, the moderator leaned forward. For the first time, he felt uncertain. He had hosted press conferences before, seen hundreds of stars, but never had he witnessed a presence so commanding that words themselves seemed to falter. The journalist who asked the question finally swallowed audibly, realizing the situation had changed completely. This was no longer an exchange of questions and answers. This was a moment of revelation, a moment that could leave everyone in the room reflecting for years. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the people in the audience began to sense the shift in the dynamic. The journalist's body language stiffened. The questioner's colleagues stopped whispering entirely. The back rows leaned forward. Even the skeptics felt the weight of the quiet. Muhammad Ali's eyes, still calm and unwavering, finally made brief contact with the questioner. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink. Everyone's gaze became a collective focus on the space between those two men. The energy in the room was no longer measured by words spoken or applause given. It was measured by presence, by respect, and by the anticipation of the answer that was about to come. Then, something remarkable happened. A subtle ripple passed through the crowd, a quiet acknowledgement. People who had initially come for spectacle now realized that they were witnessing something sacred, not a boxing legend, not a media stunt, but a man who carried the weight of his choices and the wisdom of a lifetime sitting silently, allowing the world to prepare for the lesson he was about to give. And for the first time that day, the journalist who asked the question noticed something in the room. Muhammad Ali's silence wasn't emptiness. It was intentional. It was controlled. It was a demonstration of power without aggression, a power that made the room collectively hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Twist beat. The audience slowly realized that the question was not about victory in the ring, nor about the titles he had won, but about courage, integrity, and the moments when silence itself could speak louder than action. At that moment, every person in the room, journalists, spectators, cameras, moderators, understood. Muhammad Ali had already won this round, not with a punch, not with words, but with presence, calm, and the quiet tension that made everyone, for a brief moment, confront their own expectations. The stage was set, the silence was complete, and when Muhammad Ali finally spoke, it would not be a reply anyone could anticipate. It would be a lesson the entire world would remember. The room held its breath. For nearly 10 minutes, silence had stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with expectation. Every pen poised mid-sentence, every camera aimed, every heart in the room caught somewhere between awe and anxiety. Then Muhammad Ali slowly lifted his head, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had lived his life on purpose, and now chose the exact moment to speak. He looked at the journalist, Not with anger, not with judgment, not even with impatience. Just a calm, unwavering gaze. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience, clear, deliberate, measured. "You asked me if I ever regretted the things I chose not to fight for," he said. Every eye locked on him, every ear straining to catch each syllable. "And the answer is—" He paused. A small breath, almost imperceptible. "I have no regrets." The room felt a collective shift. Some reporters exhaled quietly, thinking they had misunderstood. Some leaned forward instinctively, sensing there was more. Some whispered to themselves, "How can that be?" Ali continued, voice calm but carrying quiet authority. "It's not about winning every battle. It's not about proving yourself in every moment. Sometimes the strongest fight is the one you refuse, the one you walk away from, the one you let go, because you know it's not right, or it's not worth your energy, or it could hurt someone else more than it helps." The journalist's face reflected disbelief, curiosity, and a dawning respect. He had expected a quip, a witty comeback, maybe even a deflection. He did not expect this lesson raw, simple, and profound. Ali's eyes swept across the room slowly, acknowledging each person without speaking to them individually. "You see," he said, "real strength isn't always about throwing the hardest punch. It's about knowing when to fight and when to stay silent. It's about protecting yourself and protecting others. It's about choosing courage over ego, patience over impulse, and integrity over recognition." A few reporters scribbled furiously, but even their notes couldn't capture the essence. Cameras captured his face, his calm demeanor, the almost meditative focus he carried. The power in the room was not physical, it was moral, emotional, and intellectual. "People think silence means weakness," Ali continued, "but sometimes silence is louder than any words. It can teach, it can protect, it can change minds. And sometimes," he added, voice dropping slightly, "it can save lives." The journalist who had asked the question now looked down, ashamed and enlightened at the same time. He realized that the question had been answered in a way he could never have anticipated. Not with anger, not with theatrics, not with spectacle, but with truth. Ali leaned back slightly, letting the words sink into the room. The audience felt it, the subtle release of tension, the recognition that something monumental had just occurred. Even skeptics in the back row nodded quietly. Even the moderator paused, knowing there was nothing left to direct. Then Ali smiled, faint but genuine. Not the smile of a performer, not the charm of a celebrity. The smile of a man who had lived his values, and just reminded the world why those values mattered more than fame, money, or applause. He added, almost as an afterthought, "Every choice you make defines who you are. Every fight you refuse is just as important as every fight you accept. And when your decisions honor respect, truth, and courage, that's how your legacy is built." The room remained quiet for a long beat. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the camera seemed to hesitate, unsure if capturing the moment could do it justice. Finally, someone whispered, "Whoa," and it was all anyone needed to say. Muhammad Ali had turned what could have been an ordinary interview into a life lesson for everyone present, and for generations to come. Engagement beat. If Ali's silence and wisdom moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories of courage and integrity. And comment below which part of this moment spoke to you the most. Your insight helps us create even better videos. In that moment, the questioner understood something essential. This was not about winning or losing. It was about teaching, guiding, and inspiring through presence, calm, and deliberate choice. The room had witnessed history, not through a fight or a spectacle, but through a quiet, controlled, and unforgettable act of human strength. And as Ali finally rose from his chair, the energy in the hall shifted again, no longer tense, no longer uncertain. Now it was filled with respect, and reflection. He had spoken, and the world, small as it seemed in that press room, would never forget what he said. The press room had shifted completely. What began as an ordinary interview had transformed into something profound. Reporters, spectators, and even casual observers who had come expecting spectacle were now witnesses to a lesson in courage, integrity, and self-control. Muhammad Ali didn't need to throw a punch to command respect. He didn't need to shout to silence a room. He didn't need to entertain to make an impact. He had done all of that, and more, through calm, deliberate choice. The journalist who had asked the question now understood why Ali's silence had been so powerful. It wasn't emptiness. It wasn't avoidance. It was authority tempered by wisdom. It was the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself through confrontation, but instead shows itself in how it protects, guides, and teaches. As Ali rose from his chair, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Every camera lens, every pen, every eye followed him, not out of expectation, but out of respect. He approached the center of the room slowly, deliberately, allowing the lesson to settle in the minds of everyone present. No one rushed him. No one interrupted. Everyone understood this moment was bigger than any headline or soundbite. Strength, he said quietly, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. It's not about hurting others. It's not about being the loudest, the fastest, or the most famous. Real strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It is standing firm when the world expects you to step aside. It is choosing patience over impulse, courage over ego, and wisdom over pride. Even the skeptics nodded subtly. Even the critics lowered their pens. Everyone realized that the words, calm as they were, carried more weight than any punch could. The journalist who had asked the question smiled softly, humbled by the clarity of the moment. He had come seeking an answer that could entertain or provoke. Instead, he had been given a lesson in humanity. Ali paused and looked around one final time. Then, with a faint but genuine smile, he added, "Every choice you make matters. Every silence you keep. Every word you speak. They shape the world you live in. If you live with integrity and courage, you can leave a legacy far greater than any victory in a ring." The room remained still for a few more seconds. Then, slowly, applause began, quiet at first, then louder, until the space was filled with respect, admiration, and understanding. Muhammad Ali didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand applause. He simply gave the world a reminder that courage is not always visible, that battles are not always fought with fists, and that the strongest people often speak in the quietest, most deliberate ways. Engagement beat. If Ali's words inspired you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because we bring stories of courage, wisdom, and life lessons that the world needs to see. Comment below which part of this story moved you the most. Was it the silence, the wisdom, or the courage to stay calm in the face of expectation? Your thoughts help us create even better videos. As the audience slowly began to rise, some whispered to their neighbors, "I've never seen anything like this. This is more than a press conference. This is a lesson for life." And they were right. Ali left the room with dignity, leaving behind more than just words. He left behind a reminder: you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight every battle to be victorious. Sometimes, the quietest choices carry the greatest impact. And while this moment had ended, the lessons would linger, in the hearts of those present, and in the minds of everyone who would hear about it. The story of Muhammad Ali's silence, and the wisdom behind it, wasn't just about a single day. It was about how we all choose to act, speak, and protect what matters most. About how courage doesn't always make noise, but always makes a difference. So remember, strength isn't just about winning. It's about making choices that matter. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait, observe, and act with intention. More inspiring stories are coming your way, stories that teach, move, and remind us all why courage and wisdom matter. Tell us which part of Muhammad Ali's silence taught you the most, so we can create even better videos for you in the future. Because lessons like this deserve to be shared, remembered, and applied.